Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today, we're here to talk about another global issue and another topic that is very important in this current world. This topic that we're going to talk about is also going to be a little bit controversial, but as always, we're going to try to offer our unbiased opinion on this issue. Obviously, any opinion can't be unbiased, but we're going to try to make sure that we're able to back up our opinion with facts and with statistics and with data. The topic of discussion for today, yeah, as you might know, is the battle for the global currency king. And the battle is between the US dollar versus the Chinese yuan. As usual, we have our usual hosts, Shahzaib Karim and Arib Malik, who are going to talk about this topic. We also have a special guest speaker today, Mashur Hashim Mahedi, who is also going to offer his opinions on this topic. Mashur is a student at AISD and he's currently in grade 9. His biggest dream and his dream is to become an economist when he grows up. Unfortunately, as our school only offers economics courses from grade 11, he is unable to take any formal economics classes. But he has been watching economics video on YouTube for a very long time, for almost 2 years right now, from the start of middle school, so that he's able to learn the economic concepts and make sure that he's able to understand what is happening in the world. Because economics, at the end of the day, is everywhere. Mashur is also very sad because at the start of his high school life, he wanted to take economics course and he thought in high school he would be able to do that. But he was unable to do that because our school doesn't offer that. But he is going to wait 2 more years, and in grade 11, he will take his first economics course as an IB student. And Mashur, would you like to add anything to the introduction that I've just said?
No, so thank you guys for having me, and hopefully we have a good talk today.
Thank you, Mashur, for coming to our podcast today. Now, the topic of discussion, as I've said before, is the battle for the global currency king, dollar versus the Chinese yuan. Now, you might be wondering, why do we need to talk about global currency? Why do we need to talk about which currency is being used by companies around the world to do transactions? The reason we want to talk about it, because if a certain country has a huge influence over the global transactions that are taking place, that means that country is able to, in an extent, control other countries' currencies. Right now, the US dollar, as I believe, 70% of the world's transactions, or I believe it's more than 70% of the world's transactions, are done by the US dollar. And for this reason, the US has a lot of say in the world economics and has a lot of say in the influence of other currencies. For example, as a forex trader myself, and as many of you might be aware, in the forex market, most currencies are paired against the USD. And for this reason, when the Federal Reserve decides to increase the US interest rates, the US dollar goes up. But at the same time, the Bangladeshi taka goes down. And that was what happened with our currency, with the Bangladeshi taka, when the US Federal Reserve decided to increase the interest rates after the COVID pandemic. I believe after the COVID pandemic, I believe the valuation of the Bangladeshi taka went down. And this is what I also talked about in my research paper, which has been published in a reputable journal in South Asia. And obviously, this is something that's unfortunate for Bangladesh, but this is a thing that's happening to other countries. And now that calls on a bigger question for all of us: do we need a global currency? Do we need a currency that's able to that's do we need a currency that we're able to do transaction in? Right now, that's the US dollar. And that's a question that has a very nuanced answer. Yes, we need a global currency because at the end of the day, for example, if I am in country A and let's say Shazib, you're in country B, and I need to buy, let's say, a car from you, you wouldn't accept my currency, I wouldn't accept your currency, and this is a big problem for both of us, right?
Yeah.
And for this reason, we need a currency that we both like and we both know that it's safe. And for this reason, the US dollar comes into play, it comes into action, because the US dollar, at the end of the day, is one of the most safest, most reliable, most stable currencies in the world. Not one of the, probably the most stable, most reliable currencies in the world, because it's used daily and its value is it's not strictly controlled by the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve uses the US, has a lot of say of the valuation of the US dollar. And the US dollar is very safe, is a very safe currency, because at the end of the day, in most countries in the world, the people who are in power, usually the businessmen or usually the top politicians, they also use US dollar. US dollar is also used by different corporations, as I said before, to do their transaction, which gives US dollar a lot of power. With that, it gives the US also a lot of power. And now, after the rapid globalization, after the fall of the Soviet Union, obviously the US dollar became more stronger. But now we have a new player in this field, and that's China. After the 1980s, China saw rapid economic growth, and the Chinese currency, and not the Chinese currency, but the Chinese economy, like, blew, and it increased like exponentially, right? And obviously that means that China now has a lot of say in the global economy, because at the end of the day, everything is made in China right now. Not everything, but majority of the things. If I were to look around me right now, most of the things that I have in my room are made in China. Why? Because they're able to manufacture at a very rapid pace. They're able to make sure that the manufacturing they're doing is of good quality, and they're able to manufacture at a very cheap rate compared to other countries because of their large population. And obviously China now wants to use that as an advantage, use that to their advantage, by trying to make their currency also a global currency, Chinese yuan, by making sure that other countries also use the Chinese yuan, so that China also has a lot of say in the global economy, just like the US does now. And is China as powerful in the global economy as the US? Nah, probably not. The US has a lot more say in the world economy than China does, because at the end of the day, more people use the US dollar than China, than the Chinese yuan. But that might change, and that's what we are here to talk about today. The battle for the global currency king, US dollar versus Chinese yuan. At the end of the day, we're going to talk about whether it should be the US dollar or it should be the Chinese yuan, which should be the global currency king. Now, Mashur or any of the hosts, would you like to talk about or add anything to the information that I've just said?
Yeah, Araf. Also, like, to add on to what you said, like the example you gave about me, and also the example of the importance and value of the U.S. dollar currency. To add on to what you said, I'd say that the U.S. dollar is like widely used as the standard currency for international trade, like you said, right? And for example, commodities like oil, gold, and many other are priced in dollars actually, regardless of where they're being bought or sold. And I'd say that this widespread use in trade transactions simplifies the process for companies and countries engaging in international trade. And this also reduces the exchange rate risk, and it also promotes liquidity.
Yeah, Shazib, I would agree with you here. Additionally, I would say that currently, as of now, the US dollar is still the king. Approximately 60% of all foreign bank reserves and nearly 40% of the world's debt are denominated in US dollars, which underscores the pivotal role of the dollar. In contrast, like statistically speaking, Chinese yuan, according to the International Monetary Funds, since 2016 holds a relatively minor 2.45% of global reserves. And this shows that the dollar supremacy is still there compared to the Chinese yuan. But I would like to say that this might change given BRICS, and I think that Arif will talk about BRICS a bit later. But like we have to take into factor that BRICS is going to play a large part of our discussion today. So I would say that the yuan might at some point in time be at the same par with the dollar. So Marshall, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, I would have to agree that US dollar is still like the king, as you said, of international currencies. But with addition of BRICS and as we can see, Brazil, like the countries in BRICS joining together to form their own currency and sort of move US dollar out of the equation, we'll obviously see a big change of these in the coming years, and we'll be living in the world where we're seeing the effects of that.
Yeah, and also to add on to like what a bit on what you guys also said about the Chinese yuan, and also how you touched on the increase on China's currency yuan. I'd say that the rise of the yuan also mirrors China's increasing geopolitical influence. As China continues to grow as a global power, it pushes for a greater use of the yuan in international dealings to enhance its strategic autonomy and reduce vulnerability to U.S. financial policies.
Thank you for all the information that has been shared. Now, I would like to go back to history now, and to talk about how the US dollar became more powerful and became so powerful. And all of us alive right now, we think that the US dollar was always this powerful. This wasn't the case. And this wasn't the case for most of humanity. This is the case for, I would say, like almost 100 years right now. So the US dollars became more powerful after the Bretton Woods Conference, which established the US dollar as the backbone of international finance. And this arrangement obviously meant that the US dollar was pegged to global currencies. And for this reason, even right now in the forex market, most of the currencies are pegged against the US dollar. Moreover, the US dollar back then was valued against the gold, and this obviously meant and signaled the countries that were pegging their currency to US dollar that no, this currency is safe because it's pegged to gold, and gold is something we trust. But after the dissolution of the gold standard in 1971 by a very famous president called Mr. Nixon, the US dollar still continued its dominance, even though it was not backed by gold, but it was backed by the faith and the credit of the US government. And this was very important thing that we have to highlight, that before 1971, countries were countries like the US dollar or supported the US dollar or believed that the US dollar was stable currency because they had some intrinsic value, or say they have some value to compare to. But after 71, they had just the faith of the US government. And that faith obviously is very strong now because almost 50 years have gone by. More than 50 years have gone by, and still the US dollar is the world's most dominant currency, which shows that the US government, at the end of the day, is a very stable government. And the oil crisis of the 1970s and the subsequent oil deals with the oil producing nations meant that the oil transactions were done in dollars, and that was probably one of the reasons that the dollar still remained in demand. Because if you think about it, everyone needs oil. What do you need oil for? You
You need oil for your cars. I would say probably the most are of.
That's true. You need oil for cars, but the thing you need oil for is to survive. Because if you look around your room, you'll see things that have been brought to your house by a transportation method. It has been brought to your house by a truck. It has been brought to your house by a car or something else. And what does that car use? Oil. The ship that brought the stuff to your country, what does that use? Oil. The plane that brought the stuff to your country, what does that use? Oil. The plane that you use to travel to other countries, what does that use? Oil. At the end of the day, you need oil to move things around, and you need to move things around to be able to be a productive economy. And the oil producing nations, which is at the end of the day most Middle Eastern countries, such as but not limited to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, these countries decided to transact in the US dollar, which meant that the dollar was still one of the world's most reliable currencies and the currency that people trusted. And now coming into picture in the 1980s was China, as I've said before. And China's economic power was unlike the US, which the dollar became powerful because of the Bretton Woods conference, and because US already was established economy. China's currency became powerful because China was a global. It had become a global economic superpower. I'm not saying it's a political superpower. I'm saying economic superpower because everything is made in China. Not everything. Majority of the things are made in China, if you know what I mean. Like one of the first things a child might learn by playing is probably the words "made in China" because their toy is probably made in China. And for this reason, China had a lot of say, and they wanted to reflect that in the currency. And for this reason, they wanted the yuan's increased usage in international trade. Moreover, the key reforms such as the acceptance of the yuan into the IMF's special drawing rights SDR basket in 2016, and efforts to encourage trade partners in the Belt of Road initiatives, which is I think Bangladesh is also part of this, to use the yuan, have also significantly raised its international profile. And now, is there anything you would like to add to the information that I've said? And I think I'm repeating myself, but this is also very key information.
Yeah, Araf, and you know how you talked about you were talking about the history on how the U.S. dollar became powerful and how it gained its economic power. I'd say that to add on to what you said, if we look at the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, like um, how the dollar's dominance came post World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. This agreement was established that the U.S. dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, linked to gold and other currencies that were attached to the dollar. And the US was the only country with the ability to print dollars, and the stability and strength of its economy after the war made the dollar a natural choice for the world's reserve currency. And I'd like to talk more about the post-war economic dominance. Like after World War II, the United States emerged economically stronger than its war-ravaged European and Asian counterparts. It accounted for a significant portion of the world's economic output and held a majority of the world's gold reserves. And this economic dominance underpinned the confidence in the dollar and its use in international trade and finance.
I would completely agree with you, Shahzib. Like I think we also touched base on this in history class once as well with Mr. Spivey. We talked about the Bretton Woods Agreement in '44. involving the many nations which pegged the global currencies to the dollar, which was in turn convertible to gold, which was around $35 per ounce. And this stability offered and promoted the use of dollar in international trade. But however, when the Bretton Woods Agreement collapsed in 71, when Nixon, as Araf said, ended the gold convertibility, this, instead of diminishing the dollar's dominance, marked the transition to a flat currency system where the dollar was no longer tied to gold, and this role expanded significantly by 1999. I have a statistic in front of me. Nearly two-thirds of the currency reserves held globally were in dollars, according to the IMF. And currently in 2021, I believe like most of the, I mean most, if not all, the countries use dollar as their foreign reserve currency. So this shows that historically, what allowed the dollar to be important was the Bretton Woods Agreement. But I would say like President Nixon also had, I would say, one of the key roles to making sure that dollar is king, and I would say he paved the way for dollar to be the king. So Shahzaib, would you agree with that, or Mashur?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Arib, 100%. Arib, and you know how we've been talking about the US dollar and it's how it gained power. We should also shift to the Chinese yuan, and I'd say that it gained like economic development and power through many different factors. And I've talked about the infrastructure and urbanization because China invested heavily in infrastructure, including roads, railways, airports, and telecommunications networks, which improved efficiency and connected markets. Urbanization was also another critical element of China's development strategy, with millions of people moving from rural areas to cities, fueling economic growth and creating a massive consumer market. And not only that, the investment that China made in education and innovation was crucial, as recognizing the importance of human capital. China made significant investments in education and research and development. This focus has shifted China up the value chain from basic manufacturing to more advanced technology and services, including telecommunications, AI, and renewable energy technologies.
Yeah, I would like to add how like China became a global powerhouse by they really used everything they had to their advantage. They have a lot of open land and they use that to build their infrastructure, and they also use their population to rapidly grow infrastructure, invest in education, where we can see very high literacy rates from China, and this helped them not only become a well developed country but also have like produce very smart individuals, and then it also helped them with their their currency to make it a more higher and a more powerful currency when compared to US dollar.
Thank you for all the information that you have shared. Now, I would like to talk about how these two currencies control their currency. How these two countries control their currencies. Now, China and the US are obviously based on different economic systems, because if you look at it, the US is more, I would say, free market than China is. China is obviously not a communist country. It's a communist country on paper, like by the constitution, I think, but it's not a hardcore communist country. So the way they control the currency is going to be different than the US, obviously, which is a very hardcore capitalist country. And now the US currency, or the US dollar, is controlled by the US Federal Reserve, and they control it through different things like interest rate adjustments, open market operations, and through emergency lending facilities, which obviously have global effect on not just the global financial market but also the global liquidity of the US dollar, how much US dollar is present in the world. And this obviously policies can lead to significant inflows in or out of the dollar, affecting the dollar's value, and by extension the global economic stability. Because at the end of the day, if you think, Shazib, as I've said at the start of the podcast, if I want to buy a car with from you, and if the Federal Reserve decides to decrease the amount of US dollar that should flow in the global economy, or the economy in general, then what will happen? I need more dollars, but it's more scarce. That means the value of your car went up, right?
Yeah, exactly, Araf.
Yes, so that means that it also is, to some extent, is influencing the global transactions that are happening. And on the other hand, the People's Republic, the People's Bank of China's strategy is also very different, because they're very careful in how they approach in trying to control the economy and also the yuan. because they try to not to liberate the yuan, but they have, for example, every day I think they have a fixed daily range that the yuan it can like go up and down from. Yeah, like I think it's like around seven-ish, ish yuan per dollar. And they use different methods such as direct intervention and policy mechanisms, and recent initiatives aimed at attracting foreign investment directly into China's financial markets are also intended to bolster the yuan further. And the podcast title is obviously the global currency king, yuan versus the battle for the global currency king, yuan versus the US dollar. And so far we have not been able to establish which should be the global currency king. At one hand we have yuan, which obviously is not by used by so many currencies. On the other hand we have the dollar, which has been the world's uh, dominant currency for 50 years. And the information that we have found out so far is that the obviously at the end of the day both of these currencies are controlled by their respective monetary banks, which are for US that's the Federal Reserve, and for China that's the People's Bank of China. And so far there have been significant differences between these currencies, but except that the yuan, which is also like significant, actually let me take back my statement. One of the biggest significant difference between the yuan and the dollar is that the dollar can go up and down. The Federal Reserve can't say, oh, you have to keep the dollar within 100 of this currency pair. No, you can't do that. But the yuan, it's controlled heavily by the Bank of China, People's Bank of China, because they set a daily rate that the yuan is allowed to fluctuate in and out from. And obviously this means that the yuan is more controlled by the Chinese government than the dollar is. So I don't know that's a good thing or a bad thing. Would you like to add anything to the things that I've just said?
Yeah, Ralph, I would say like definitely like one of the many reasons I would agree with you here that I personally don't think that yuan is the global currency king is because there is way too much government intervention in controlling the yuan. In economics, free market economy is needed for a country in a capitalist society, and the truth is majority of the world is in a capitalist society, and which is why we need less government intervention. And the fact that Chinese government, the CCP, is always intervening in the process of yuan truly makes the yuan not a favorable options to investors as well as many other people. But just to play the devil's advocate over here, or off, like since we are trying to be impartial from a Chinese perspective, advocating for the yuan or the RMB to become more dominant over the global US dollar would, first of all, I would say many people would try to use the Chinese yuan because China is the largest trading nation in the world with a total trade amounting to over $6 trillion in 2022. So because of this and because of the many initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, which enhances China's geopolitical reach, I would say many countries which are not entirely aligned with the US policies and are more lenient towards China and more lenient towards China would prefer this. So, Mashur, would you like to say anything, or Shahzaib?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So you can speak. No problem.
Okay, yeah. So I would like to agree with what Arif said about the freedom. It really also goes down to the leadership that both of these countries have. I mean, we've seen U.S. progress with good leadership over the years, which is why they've kept the king title for the dollar. But then we can also see China in the recent years slowly coming back up and fighting, and now they're in a very tight position while they're both fighting. So I think it really depends on what the situation is and what relations they have with other countries, and plays to who will get the king title of their currency.
Yeah, and to basically add on to what you guys said, like if we look at the US emphasizes free market principles with minimal intervention, and this benefiting from the global trust and widespread use of the dollar. And this approach supports the US's position as a global financial leader, right? And whereas if we look at China, China prioritizes stability and control, using more direct interventions to align the yuan's value with state economic policies. And this method supports China's development and transitional economic model but it can create tensions with trading partners who accuse China of currency manipulation.
Thank you for all the information that you have shared. Now we would like to move closer to present time by talking about the U.S.-China trade tensions. Under the presidency of Donald Trump, China and the U.S. obviously had some like trade wars and stuff. And obviously, both of the Trump administration and the Xi Jinping administration obviously continue to some extent on these trade wars by saying that we are not gonna work on you on this thing and that thing. And obviously both of these countries have been imposing significant tariffs on each other goods, and these measures also have at times led to volatility in the yuan's value and have tested China's economic policies. And China also has been particularly active in forming economic alliances in Asia and Africa, and often using this relationship to promote the use of the yuan. The establishment of institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or also known as AIIB, supports these efforts by financing projects in yuan, therefore like expanding its uses. And this is one of the key things that I would like to talk about. What China is doing probably is that they are trying to make countries pay back them in yuan, effectively making sure that the global transactions in some way is done in yuan, right? And obviously, the influence of US political stability has also been a little bit rocky, because if you think about it, political events in the US, such as the US elections and legislation gridlock, and obviously capital capital riots that happened, which was very unfortunate, has influenced the ability of China, has enabled China to, say to countries, our currency, we have more stability in politics, because at the end of the day, there are little things that Chinese politicians can do, right? So obviously that means that China is more stable, because democracy obviously allows multiple opinions, but at the same time, if those opinions become actions, that means it's going to be a problem, because those actions can easily turn to fights. While for China, one opinion, one country, they have like one like they only have they obviously not always, but usually they promote one opinion and those things. So usually you don't have like fightings before people or debates before people that much, which is obviously good or bad, because at one hand it ensures stability, at the other hand the one idea might not be the good idea, there might be better ideas in the world. And China's political system offers a high degree of predictability, because 4 years from now, I know you can guess who's going to be the Chinese president. 4 years from now, I don't know. I don't know if you can guess who's going to be the U.S. president. And obviously, this means that there's centralized control and issues related to governance. Is not that question in China, but at the same time, the U.S. is more transparent than China, and there's more rule of law in the U.S. than China. Because at the end of the day, China obviously it's not that transparent. They sometimes hide their data or even sometimes fake their data, but the US usually doesn't do that. So that also calls into questions of whether the US or China's currency should be the global currency king. Because at one hand you have the Chinese currency, which is controlled by a government, which is at the end kind of more predictive, kind of more stable than the US is, but at the same time that government is more not transparent. The US is more transparent, they're more honest with the things that they're doing. And obviously the yuan's international presence is expected to grow, there's no doubt about it. But it's the bigger question is, will the yuan ever replace the US dollar? And that's what we're going to talk about, and that's what we, I think, have been talking about so far. And this obviously include the vast existing financial structure that supports the US dollar. Because at the end of the day, think about it, the global financial structure right now is going to depend on the US dollar. What makes a bank or what makes a company, decide, oh, I'm not gonna you trade the US dollar, I'm gonna trade now in Chinese yuan? Because the US dollar has been the global currency king for 50 years. What's gonna make them change it? There's nothing that's going to make them change it. The US is still a stable country, isn't it? And for this reason, and other things are also called into question when it comes to China, because there are ongoing trust issues with Chinese political systems. Because the Chinese political system is not that transparent, and the Chinese financial practices they're transparent to a limited extent at the same time. And obviously the future might see a more decentralized currency landscape, and that's a more nuanced analysis that I would like to highlight. In the future, we might see not a global currency king. We might see US dollar, we might see Chinese yuan, and we might see other currencies that are, at controlling the market at the same, have the same market share of the global transactions that are taking place. The US dollar might have this percentage, other currencies might have this percentage. We might see a multipolar currency landscape because we have emerging markets such as India, such as Brazil, which might also play a significant role and which might choose to also diversify the currency more broadly, which could obviously diminish the currency of both the dollar and the yuan. Because if you think about it, India doesn't want the yuan to be the global currency. At the same time, India doesn't also want the US dollar to be global currency. For this reason, there will be use a global currency battle between these two currencies. Also, Brazil is also there, and that means that there will be a more multipolar currency that's going to exist in the world, not just one currency. And so that also shows that the future might be more nuanced and more. There might be not just about the US dollar and China. It might be about other countries as well. And as again, we have to connect back to our podcast title, the title episode of for today, which is the battle for the global currency king, dollar versus yuan. And the thing that I've just said, it might not be the dollar versus the yuan. It might be also other currencies who might also play a global role. Who and the US and the dollar, US yuan and the dollar might also be the global currency along with those currencies, and there might be a multipolar currency system that is used by people in the world. Are there any things that you would like to talk about or add any information to the things that I've just said?
Yeah, of like you you brought up the question of like, is it possible for yuan to ever take over US as the primary global currency? But I'd say personally, I'd say it's unlikely, or at least very unlikely for it to happen anytime soon, because if we look at it, the dollar is entrenched in the global finance systems. It is the primary currency for international trade, all transactions, and it's held as reserves by central banks and financial institutions worldwide. And shifting from the dollar would require not just economic and political adjustments, but also a restructuring of global financial architecture, which would be a colossal endeavor.
Mashur, would you
I would
like to
have
add
to
anything to the information that Shazab has said?
Yes, I would have to agree of how it's kept as a global reserve in many banks, and it's an international known currency. So is the Chinese currency, but this U.S. dollar, I mean, we can pretty much exchange it in any exchange stores when we're traveling abroad, and it's accepted in many countries in cash, and it's very recognizable. I mean, if we think about money, I think the first thing that comes to our mind is a green sheet of paper, and I think the U.S. dollar is a big influence of that to us.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Mashur and Shazab over here. I would say like the probability of the yuan replacing the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, I would say, is very close to zero, because first of all, we have to understand that majority of the world's richest countries in terms of GDP, I would say, are also like also one of the also the politically powerful countries that who are like the P5 of the United Nations Security Council. Most of these countries, I would say, their stance is definitely with the US, and therefore, speaking from like a geopolitical stance, I don't see any major countries backing the yuan rather than the dollar. I would say India definitely. Personally, I wouldn't say India would back the yuan than the dollar, because let's be real, like, India and China are adversaries. And for Brazil, I would say Brazil's quite unpredictable, but for now, I would say they're more lenient towards the yuan. But overall, I would say like in the near future or even 100 years from now, the yuan replacing China is very low. As Shazib mentioned, the our financial system is entrenched in the dollar, so
I think you meant yuan replacing the dollar.
the dollar, yeah, like it cannot replace the dollar of, as like the dollar is entrenched in the financial system, as Shazib has very astutely mentioned, as well as Mashur has mentioned, like the global reserve currency, all of it is in dollars, therefore it is very unlikely.
Yeah, and to just add on like to what you guys said, since we're talking about the like unlikely possibility of the yuan taking over the US dollar, I'd like to bring up the question. Maybe Master, you can answer it since you're the guest speaker, Master. So I'd like to ask, what kind of policy shifts would China need to implement for the yuan to realistically challenge the dominance of the dollar, and what obstacles do they face in this process?
In terms of policy shifts, I mean, there's many things they can change. It's really a matter of how they start implementing changes into the everyday lives of the Chinese government. I mean, as Araf mentioned before a few minutes ago, we most likely know who's going to be the next president of. We know what like we most likely know who's going to be the next president of China in the next 4 years. But in the U.S., I mean, with democracy there, we don't necessarily know a guaranteed version of who will be the next president in the future 4, 5, 6 years. But with the Chinese government, we know stable names who will remain there for a long time. And if they don't change these influence on people, I think this will be this is a big policy that needs to be changed for them to become a bigger global powerhouse.
Yeah, and what obstacles do you think they'd face? Maybe Arib or Adim Araf, maybe you guys can also add.
No, Shahzaib, I would say like the main obstacle that China currently faces is transparency, and this is one of the reasons why many countries and investors don't like to like particularly trade with China. And for instance, I would have to look far to prove my point. Like just a few, I feel like just a few days ago, the President Biden signed a bill to ban a bill to essentially ban ByteDance and TikTok for 9 months to or to digest the app, or it will be blocked in the US because of transparency reasons. After all, because the Chinese government is very involved, as I've said, in the government. The government intervention needs to be less, I would say, in terms of policies in order to ensure that the China can at least progress. And on that topic of China and like government policies, I was reminiscent of a geography, and Masrur was saying like Mashur is one of the top geography students of high school. So therefore, Mashur, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a question. So, what Mashur, since you're the smartest geography student, so I would like to ask like, what role do you think will geopolitical tensions like such as those in the South China Sea play in influencing currency preference, particularly among neighboring countries of China?
I mean, we know China has not always been the friendliest of people in when it comes to this. I mean, we can see that US have over the years they have made enemies, but they have sort of tried to improve relations with them in the past. But with China, I mean, we know they're very close with their neighbors, Russia. But the influence of the South China Sea about the water distribution and all that will obviously play a huge role because if anything goes wrong, God forbid, countries might put sanctions or cut off relations with China, which will obviously make their currency go down and will put the US currency higher up.
Thank you for all the information that has been shared, and I agree completely with Shazeb that the yuan is unlikely to replace the US dollar as a global dominant currency. And I would like to use the evidence that Mashur Hashim Mahedi has highlighted. And this is one of the best things about bringing guest speakers, which is the diverse perspectives that they bring in. Mashur has highlighted that the US dollar is the most recognized currency in the world, and that's true. If you go right now to a Bangladeshi village and show a Bangladeshi farmer a US currency, US $100 note, they're gonna say, "Oh, that's a US dollar." If you show them the Chinese yuan, they're gonna say, "What is this?" And that shows the influence of the US dollar. And if we go abroad, for example, for our school's MUN trip, not Mashur, me and Arib have gone abroad for our school MUN trip, or even for a Discovery Week trip. What did we take?
Dollar.
Shazia, what do you
Dollar.
take? Mashur, what do you take?
He also took dollar and exchanged it there.
Yeah,
Yes, I
dollar as
took
well.
dollar and exchanged it at the airport,
Yes, all
and
of us we took dollar. Why did we take dollar? We're not from the US. We don't have any personal connections to the US. We took the dollar because it's a stable currency, and we know that it's going to be recognized by the money exchange that we're going to go to in the foreign country. I went to Nepal. Mashur went to Thailand. Arif and Shazeb went to Sri Lanka. We know all of these countries are very different. Nepal and Sri Lanka are, even though they're South Asia, their culture is very different. And Thailand and Sri Lanka, Nepal, they're world apart because their culture is obviously very different. And this shows that the US dollar has a dominance in not just the lives of big companies, not just the lives of big governments, but also the lives of individuals like us. Because we use a US dollar because that's the still dominant currency, and which shows that the Chinese yuan is unlikely to replace the US dollar soon. But now, that's a very, I would say, very half-baked argument or half-baked analysis. Another thing that I would like to highlight is that there might be more multipolar currencies in the world from now on. There might be. I'm saying might be. There won't be. I'm saying there might be. There would be. I'm saying there might be, because talking about BRICS, which Arif has highlighted, BRICS countries, which include Brazil, Russia, uh, and China, South Africa, and India. And I recently, I think they've added some other countries, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE. I think they've added also Ethiopia, Egypt. I think they've added, and this BRICS countries account for. I'm not sure, but I think they added those countries. BRICS countries account for a substantial portion of the world's population and economic growth. Together, they represent over 40% of the global population and about a quarter of the world's GDP. And their collective economic power also gives BRICS a substantial stake in global trade and finance. And one of the primary objectives of the BRIC nations has been to challenge the dollar's dominance by promoting trade settlements in their local currencies. And this move is obviously aimed at reducing transaction costs, avoiding exchange rate risk associated with the dollar, and enhancing economic cooperation among the BRICS countries. Moreover, the establishment of the new development bank (NDB) by BRICS is a critical step towards increasing financial and economic cooperation. The NDB aims to mobilize resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies. And obviously, importantly, the bank also considers issuing loans in the local currency of its members, nations, not dollars, which could further undermine the dollar's dominance in international finance. And the China has also a dominant role in BRICS. Within BRICS, China plays a key role, a leading role due to its economic size and political influence. The yuan's internalization strategy aligns with the BRICS objectives to diversify away from the dollar. By promoting the yuan as an alternative in trade and finance, China leverages its position in BRICS to enhance the country's profile. And again, I would like to highlight that BRICS is made of China and India, even though the country, even and they're working together on this to undermine the dollar to make sure that their currency is also playing a key role. Now, India obviously won't let China take all the benefits. They're not just going to let yuan be the key currency. They're also probably going to try to make the currency also a global currency. And the same is going to happen with Brazil. The same is probably going to happen with Iran. They're going to make sure that their currency is also influential. And for this reason, there might be a more multipolar currency system. And obviously, China's excessive infrastructure investment that I've highlighted, notably through mechanisms like the Belt and Road initiatives, often involves BRIC nations. These projects are frequently financed in yuan, which not only furthers the yuan's internalization, but also ties the economic fortunes of those countries more closely to China. And are there anything or any information that you would like to highlight that there might be a more multipolar currency system in the world? There might be not just a global currency, one single global currency. There might be other global currency in the world along with the yuan and dollar, like the Indian rupee or the Brazilian real. Brazilian real, I think that's what it's called. Whether they're more likely to be more global currencies than just two or just one. Are there any information or any opinions that you would like to add to this thing that I've just said?
Yeah, like some opinions I'd like to add, Araf. You were talking about the BRICS countries a lot, right? So I talk about like the challenges within the BRICS countries. So basically, despite their shared goals, the BRICS countries face challenges such as significant political, cultural, and economic differences among the members, which can hinder collaborative efforts. For example, economic instability and political issues in countries like Brazil and South Africa can affect collective initiatives. Additionally, there's strategic rivalries and differing priorities, such as those between India and China, which can complicate unanimous decision making.
Yeah, Shahzaib, I would completely agree with you there. And additionally, I would say that the prospect of a multipolar currency system, particularly with the BRICS nation challenging the dominance of US dollar, in my perspective, seems not very likely in the near future for several reasons. First of all, I would like to say that the US dollar is bolstered by the sheer amount of the US's economy, which is the largest in the world, and not even China or the BRICS nation cannot match that. And for a currency to gain international reserve status, it must be widely used in trade and finance, supported by a large, open, and stable economy, which I feel China or any of or most of the BRICS countries at this moment do not have. Additionally, you need political stability in these countries, which many of these BRICS countries have, but like they don't have transparency. Therefore, it's very unlikely, especially like Russia or Brazil, they have experienced significant political turbulence. So considering that, I would say it's very unlikely. However, I would say like we are talking about multipolar currencies, but we should also take a look into decentralized currencies for a moment. I think Araf also did a TED talk about that. I would like, even though like like decentralized currencies, I would say I think a country like Ecuador, I would say you has used decentralized, has like allowed Bitcoin as a legal transaction, and therefore like this shows that many like not many, but like some countries are moving towards decentralized currencies. And I'm just putting it out there, but at the moment, I would say neither the decentralized currencies or the multipolar currencies would work, because multipolar currencies it's very hard to replace the dollar by the sheer force of the US, and also because decentralized currencies it's very unpredictable, and also like governments simply wouldn't try to back decentralized currencies instead of their own currencies. So therefore, I'm simply putting it out there. So Marshall, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would agree. The government wouldn't just randomly one day wake up and want to decentralize it. And I think this really like there's a lot of change that needs to happen for this, and it will take a lot of time. So that's why I think the US dollar will still remain of how it is, and the Chinese currency will come close, but will not have the impact of that the US dollar did.
Thank you for all the opinions. Now, I would like to talk about a little bit about the political and economic objectives of BRICS. I think we've talked about them a little bit, but I would like to go in depth. And the BRICS nations often frame their collaboration as a way to counterbalance Western economic and political influence, particularly that of the United States, by strengthening economic ties within BRICS nations themselves and reducing global reliance on the dollar. These countries aim to gain a greater economic sovereignty and a more balanced economic order. And obviously, the drive to reduce dollar dependency faces several challenges. The dollar's global role is cemented by its use in commodities trading, its status as a safe haven asset, and the depth of and liquidity of US financial markets. For BRICS nations, including the yuan, to gain similar trust and utility, obviously brings calls on significant hurdles in terms of economic stability, financial transparency, and the market depth need to be overcome. For example, if you look at it right now, many people in Argentina and Lebanon, after their currencies have failed, are using the US dollar because they think it's a safe haven currency, and it is. And the role of BRICS in shifting currency dynamics, as I've said, might be a multipolar currency system. The actions of BRICS may lead to a shift towards a more multipolar currency system where the yuan, the euro, the dollar, the rupee, and other currencies might potentially play a global role. This shift would reflect a broader move towards a global, decentralized, and diversified global economic architecture. And the economic policy of BRICS, particularly in terms of currency usage and financial cooperation, could significantly influence global economic policy making, as I've said before. And obviously, as always, are there anything that you would like to add to the information that I just said?
Araf, yeah, I would completely agree with you. Like geopolitically speaking, the BRICS countries are trying to like sort of undermine the US's influence, and it's gonna take time. But I would say like if we like look at the initiative that the BRICS countries have done, particularly China, they're investing a lot in Africa, and we haven't touched base on that. But like Africa is gonna play a huge factor as well, because Africa, to me at least, is the most underrated continent in the world, because there's a lot of potential in Africa. And therefore the fact that China is investing a lot in Africa shows that in the future the Chinese influence and the Chinese currency's influence will be exponential in Africa, and yeah, in Africa. So yeah, I would say like yeah, the Chinese currency, like China is backing many currencies in Africa for their investment and stuff. So I would say like the yuan's impact politically is increasing as well. The Chinese government also built military bases. I feel military bases. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, in the Horn of Africa. So it shows that the Chinese government and the BRICS nations are trying to undermine the US dollar. So Masrur or Shahzaib, like both of you are excellent like MU and geography students. Would you like to like talk about like Africa and like how politically like China can impact and use Africa as a vehicle to sort of establish its currency's presence and undermine the US dollar?
Yeah, so I would have to agree with you of like BRICS joining together, like these 10, 12 countries which are joining together, and especially China's huge investments in Africa. We know Africa is like very rich in natural resources. They have a lot of open land there. They have a good population. There's many cultures, many different people, types of people there, and China's investments there and building military bases really shows of that these countries are joining together to overwhelm the US dollar and remove the power that the US dollar currently has in the world and create a world where not it's not run by the US dollar, but influence of these other countries do play in it.
Yeah, or even how you asked basically that how can China use Africa to undermine the US dollar? I'd say that China's if we look at China's influence over commodity markets, China is a major consumer of African commodities such as oil, minerals, and metals. And by increasing its influence over these markets in Africa and insisting on trading these resources in yuan, China can erode the traditional dominance of the dollar in these critical markets. And commodities like oil are traditionally priced in US dollars, and shifting this norm could have significant implications for the US for the dollar status.
Now, bringing on to the essential question of the day, the battle for the global currency king, dollar versus Chinese yuan. And I think that all of us would agree that the Chinese yuan is unlikely, very unlikely, to replace the US dollar as the global currency, because the US dollar is still one of the, or not one of the world's most influential global currency. It's one of the most reliable global currencies. It's one of the most probably safest global currencies, because it's controlled by a country that, even though the US has a lot of flaws, and US has a lot of flaws, and but at the end of the day, the US is a relatively stable country. Their Federal Reserve, unlike that of China, isn't controlled by the central government. And I'm sure most of you are aware of this. The US Federal Reserve, even though if the US president wants to do something, let's say, if the US president wants to decrease the interest rates to make it easier for people to take loans and buy things, so that so that he or she can win the elections, the Federal Reserve governor can easily say no. And because the government, the US central government, or the US presidency, has no control over the US Federal Reserve. And this is one of the reasons the Federal Reserve is run by economists. It's not run by politicians. It's run by pseudo politicians, but it's not run by politicians. It's run by economists, and they want the best thing for the country. And for this reason, it makes the US dollar one of the world's most safest currency. And it's unlikely that the battle for the global currency king is likely to be over with the US dollar still being the dominant currency in the world. We also have introduced another alternative perspective, where there might be multipolar currency system, where the US dollar, the yuan, the rupee, or the Brazilian currency would equally have global presence in the global economy. And this is the conclusion that I've come to based on our 1 hour discussion, almost 1 hour discussion. Are there any information that you would like to add to the things that I've just said? Mashur, especially, are there anything that you would like to add?
No, I 100% agree, and I think in the future we'll see to move switching more about BRICS, but I think in the future we'll see more BRICS becoming a bigger industry, and they could potentially add more countries that would benefit them. Like for example, last year we saw them add countries like Saudi Arabia, which we know are very rich in oil and natural resources, and this would obviously benefit BRICS as they would have an access and they're just one phone call away to getting access to lots of oils and gasolines and stuff.
Yeah, Araf, like how you're starting this topic on the battle for the currency king, right? So if we look at the two perspectives like we've examined, but if we investigate them a bit more closely, and if we examine them right now, if like for example, if you look at the dominance of the US dollar, and if we look at the economic stability, the US has the largest and one of the most stable economies in the world, as we know, underpinned by the robust institutions and a strong rule of law. And the financial markets the US dollar boasts the largest and most liquid financial markets, including for bonds and equities. And also the dollar is universally trusted and used globally, as we all know. It's used for traditional trade, investment, and as a reserve currency held by central banks. And if you look at all transactions, the dollar's role as the primary currency for trading oil, known as the petrodollar system, further enhances its use globally. So here, like the points that I brought up, we can like see how dominant the US dollar really is, right? For how and how dominant it is in the battle for the currency king, where which we all can agree that the US dollar is obviously winning. But if we also look at the other side, and if you look at the rise of the Chinese yuan, and if you like the economic growth, as like China as the world's second largest economy, China's economic policies, growth rate, and expanding influence in global trade bolster the case for the yuan, and even the uh, policy initiatives. China has implemented several policies aimed at internationalizing the yuan, including bilateral trade agreements that encourage the use of yuan over the dollar, and initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. So yeah, so that's I'm just providing an insight for both the perspectives. So what would you guys like to add on to this?
Yeah, Shahzaib, I would completely agree with you here. Like it's like USA currently in terms of the global currency king is still number one, and in the near future or even 100 years from now, I don't see like any major countries overtaking it. Any major countries, the number two in the global reserve currency is obviously the yuan. But as you have mentioned very astutely, that the Chinese the Chinese yuan is very unlikely, given the fact that the US is very entrenched in the financial system, and also the fact that China is not very transparent with its transparent with its currency. It obviously manipulates its currency so that it stays stable, which is why it is deterring many countries, especially European countries, to avoid the transaction in yuans, and instead they prefer dollar, and most countries in fact do. So yeah, I think we had a good argument today. But Mashur, I wanted to ask you a question, since Mashur is a very smart economic student. So Mashur, I wanted to ask, like you're obviously very like knowledgeable about bricks and stuff. But so I was just wondering, like how might what role do you think that the Chinese domestic policies, particularly regarding the currency control and financial transparency, need to change the yuan to becoming a dominant global currency? I think we had a question before, but like we didn't really like go in detail. So Marshall, like what needs to be done in China? Like just to play the devil's advocate, if we want the yuan to be number one, what do you think China needs to do to for the yuan to overtake the US? Like one policy that you think that China needs to do.
I mean, domestically, they need to change many things. One I would touch on is the internal government. I mean, we know there is a bit of corruption in the government, and I think that plays a huge role, and I think that needs to change a lot. And I would also say, uh, China changing domestic and becoming a more free speech land, more democracy, as we see in the U.S. Of that will also help the currency grow. As many in the U.S., I mean, we can see free speech anywhere. We can see people wearing pretty much whatever they want on the street. But in China, we can. It's obviously more strict. They have restrictions. They have their own traditions. They have their sense of respect, which is very different. But I think they would need to become a more free, open country, and they would need to be a bit more westernized in order to become in order to overthrow the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, Mashu. Very well said.
Thank you.
So the overarching conclusion that we have come up to based on a 1 hour discussion is that the US dollar is still likely to be the global currency king. And as to answer our title question, which is the battle for title for this episode, which is the battle for the global currency king, the dollar versus the yuan. The US dollar is still likely to be the global currency king for at least 50 years or 100 years to come. I would like to end our podcast episode here, and I would like to thank Mashur Hashim Mahedi for coming to our episode recording today. Mashur Hashim Mahedi, would you like to add anything, do you have any final words before we leave?
No, not really. Thank you guys for inviting me. I had a really good time. I think we had a really good debate. We got into quite a few, 2 to 3 different topics, and yeah, it was a very fun time. And yeah, good job.
Thank you, Mashur Hashim Mehdi, for coming into today's episode. And as usual, thank you, the audience, for tuning into for today's episode. And thank you for listening to our discussion. And I hope that you have enjoyed our discussion and the things that we have had to share and the opinions that we share. And I hope that you will also join us next week for our episode 6, which is also going to be a very interesting topic, just like all the previous episodes. And see you next week. And thank you for the support and all the well wishes that you have given us. And we hope to see you next week for our 6th episode with a new guest speaker, with a new guest topic, but with the same host, me, Shahzaib Karim, and Arib Malik. Thank you.